Hello, hello, and welcome to a kind of chilly golden hour here. Hope you are enjoying the weather wherever you are. I've got some tea here to try to stay cozy while I read. So, here at the golden hour, we're here together to do something we want for 1 hour. That way, we can have some companionship, but also be able to do something that we want to get done. I am continuing to read the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Absolutely full of insights that need to cross every human mind at least once. um, and as I'm reading, I'm also, you know, right in the middle of figuring out my system for reading books that I'm kind of more studying than reading. I A while ago I mentioned um, Ryan Holiday, and I mentioned him in the context of keeping a commonplace book. So there was a clip of a YouTube interview with him. But he also on his blog post about keeping a commonplace book, which is just a place to collect, thoughts that inspire you from others, or inspirations you have yourself, quotes, things like that. Um, I noticed on the, and I think I linked that in the description of that other video. Anyway, there was a link to how to read books above your level, and I thought, oh, I have to come back to that because that's what reading books. Um, Sapiens is it's so accessible, the way it's written, that I don't feel like it's above my level, um, or many people's level, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about it, that he takes these high level concepts and communicates them in a way that's very easy to digest. But the way I'm approaching the book is from a more study perspective. So, I kind of need to. I feel like I'm frustrated with the pace at which I'm going through the book, and I can tell that's because I'm um, probably paying not paying too much attention, but because the way I'm going through it, I sense that there is a more efficient way to still do what I want to do, which is, you know, capture the things I want to emphasize as I'm reading, but not let that slow down my pace of reading too much, etc. Anyway, so that is an aside about this is my first read with me, and yeah, I just kind of keep thinking, I got to figure out a method for myself. So let me look at my notes. Let me find them. Okay, so here's the notes I've written down from yesterday. People and wheat were another evolutionary random occurrence or coincidence, but it helped us thrive. This drove the partnership in spite of immediate ish drawbacks. Then gradually, the unfortunate unintended consequences really added up, but it was too late. And then I wrote down these two quotes from the book. It says, "This is the essence of the agricultural revolution, the ability to keep more people alive under worse conditions." Um, and then the other quote I wrote down is, "One of history's few iron laws is that luxuries tend to become necessities and to spawn new obligations." So, those again, this is the wonderful problem with this book. Those two quotes alone are enough to think about for a lifetime. For, there, um, there's just so much to think about and explore in those few things. Um, but okay, let me go with my thoughts from what I wrote down, and then I'll. So, the essence of the agricultural revolution, the ability to keep more people alive under worse conditions. So, yeah, he's sort of arguing that the switch to agriculture didn't necessarily have a lot of, like, oh, hey, life is better. Instead, it was, I'm spending more time creating my food. This is harder in my body to do it this way, et cetera, et cetera. Um, And so he's also exploring the question of, all right, if it didn't have some immediate perks, why did it continue? Um, and that the answer was DNA driven. That ultimately it helped us produce more of ourselves than than died. So we ended up thriving. So we're going to be driven by that sort of biological fact that it helped us survive some, or not just some. It helped us thrive, and that ultimately is going to be the thing that drove the behavior, in spite of its drawbacks. It reminded me of a book that I haven't read but think I understand the premise of, which is Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, which I realized from maybe reading the prologue to it that he sort of addresses how it's often misused. So that people, myself included, before I read the prologue, thought it was about having a gene that sort of hardwires us for self-interest and selfishness, but really, he was trying to say what is the unit of self-preservation? Where do we see the drive to survive? Where do we see that play out? And I believe the premise of his argument is that we see that at the level of our genes, of our DNA. So in other words, it's not he wasn't trying to describe genes and saying, "Oh, we have a gene that makes us selfish." He was trying to say, what is it? Is it the selfish brain? Is it the selfish heart? Is it the selfish stomach? What is the thing that drives our self-interest? And so he was arguing, I believe, that it is the gene that is the unit of selfishness. Anyway, so it reminded me somewhat of that when he was saying, ultimately we're driven by survival, and so the fact that our partnership with wheat helped us survive, you know, was going to make it sort of a done deal, even with all these negative unintended consequences. Um, and he did go to explain too, uh, like I said, sort of in my notes, uh, humans and wheat was just another evolutionary chance that, okay, the climate produced a lot of wheat in the Middle East, which meant, hey, it was abundant and people ate it more, and then people started thriving, and then there was more wheat, because people were, either trailing it back and forth between camps, so all this sort of perfect storm of extra wheat and people thriving off of it then leads to people going, we should really cultivate this thing. And then the other quote I had, one of history's few iron laws, is that luxuries become necessities that then spawn new obligations. So true. I feel like generation after generation, what was considered achievement before then becomes the base level for the next generation. So whether that's, for a while it might have been getting a high school education was the benchmark for one generation, but then for the next generation that becomes expected. So now college is the new benchmark, and then college becomes expected. So what's the next benchmark? So that idea that, yeah, well, and I'm sort of making a different analogy out of it. What was achievement in one generation becomes expected in the next. Um, and like I said, I've read part of this book before, and I think what he's about to start to allude to is sort of like, and it's never enough. It just keeps going and going and going. It's never enough. What was good enough before is now not good enough, and so now we have to go on to the next thing. And then certainly he highlights in the quotes that it spawns new obligations. So it's like, cool. You have a roof over your head. That's awesome. That's an improvement. And now you have to maintain that roof. And now you have to maintain your plumbing. And now you have to maintain, pay for your electricity, whatever. Um, so anyway, those are my just random thoughts about what I read. Let me see what I underlined. This was saying, rather than heralding a new era of easy living, the agricultural revolution left farmers with lives generally more difficult and less satisfying than those of foragers. And he calls the agricultural revolution was history's biggest fraud. I love that. Um, let's see. So yeah, so then he's saying, what? Well, how did we get trapped in that? Well, we got trapped in that by wheat. Um, how did we? And he's sort of, I think, playing a little bit with the word. How did wheat convince us to, exchange a rather good life of hunting and foraging for this miserable farming existence? If it didn't offer a better diet, if it didn't give us economic security, if it didn't give us security against violence, um, why were we doing it? Um, and that's where he's saying, um, what then did we offer agriculturalists, including, oh, it says including that malnourished Chinese girl. In the paragraph above, he's giving the example of if life is worse for the individual, if we're imagining a young Chinese girl that's malnourished and going to die of starvation, there's no way she as an individual is saying, well, all my suffering is worth it so that people thousands of years from now can have easy access to food via, the industrial agricultural complex, right? Um, so, why on earth would individuals make that level of sacrifice? Okay, so it says it offered nothing for people as individuals, yet it did bestow something on Homo sapiens as a species. Cultivating wheat provided much more food per unit of territory, and thereby enabled Homo sapiens to multiply exponentially. And then another sentence says the currency of evolution is neither hunger nor pain, but rather copies of DNA helixes. So yeah, that's what I was saying. Made a note to myself. This reminds me of Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Genes. Yeah, that's the unit of by which we're going to measure progress. Um, and so, um, what else do we say? I don't know how foragers turned into farmers. Um, Where wheat became particularly abundant and game and other food sources were also plentiful, human bands could gradually give up their nomadic lifestyle and settle down in seasonal and even permanent camps. At first, they might have camped for 4 weeks during the harvest. A generation later, as wheat plants multiplied and spread, the harvest camp might have lasted for 5 weeks, then 6, and finally it became a permanent village. Um, so he also, sort of reiterates how gradual this shift was. That it could have been sort of as simple as that. That, okay, yeah, you may have sort of your nomadic band may have stuck around for a month in one place to like get all this wheat. That's a good deal. But then the crop was a little better next time, or the crop, whatever, what you found was a little better the next time. Um, so maybe it took 5 weeks, and then if things kept growing more plentifully, if it took 6, then you realized, hey, we can kind of stay, we've got enough to last, etc. That it just kind of the scales just sort of suddenly tip. Um, let's see. So then he's essentially saying, why did people make such a fateful miscalculation? For the same reason that people throughout history have miscalculated. People were unable to fathom the full consequences of their decisions. Um, yeah, they just couldn't foresee each little step sort of leading to the next bigger consequences. Um, the note I have here about him saying, first was 4 weeks, then 5 weeks, then 6 for the harvest. I was writing, it's like evolutionary scope creep. You know, how I think about how, like, washing machines have made our life easier. We will never turn down easy. Um, and we never go back to the previous harder way, even if the new way has bad, if unintended consequences. And these are just some of my thoughts. And then I also sort of think, and then there's also a void. again, sort of for better or worse. So it just sort of makes me think about how, yeah, I mean, a lot of my time is free from survival worries, and the free from the work of maintaining my physical body. So now I have a void to fill. So I guess, yeah, now I learn calculus. It's just kind of odd, like the consequences that come up. Um, and in one part, he's talking about wheat. It says it made sense. If you worked harder, you would have a better life. That was the plan. And I just made a note. This is like, that sounds familiar. Those are the things we still tell ourselves today. Well, I'm working harder so that this next thing can be better. Um, okay, so then why didn't humans abandon farming when the plan backfired? Partly because it took generations for the small changes to accumulate and transform society, and by then, nobody remembered that they had ever lived differently. And partly because population growth burned humanity's boats. If the adoption of plowing increased a village's population from 100 to 110, which 10 people would have volunteered to starve so that the others could go back to the good old times? There was no going back. The trap snapped shut. The pursuit of an easier life resulted in much hardship, and not for the last time. It happens to us today. Sorry, that was the end of one paragraph and the beginning of another. I just, the way he says things is so beautiful. It's so true. It's like we got ourselves into, oop, there, Dottie shot by for a second. We get ourselves into these situations that it's like we then can't back out of. Um, yeah, and then one of history's few iron laws is that luxuries tend to become necessities and to spawn new obligations. Once people get used to a certain luxury, they take it for granted. Then they begin to count on it. Finally, they reach a point where they can't live without it. So that's a great outline of that transition and how those are very different situations and experiences to be in. So for one group or generation, something might be a luxury. So a luxury, that's a bonus. It's something you can live without. But then it becomes something you take for granted. So in my words from earlier, like it's something that's expected. So now if that's an achievement, for example, it's no longer an achievement to go to high school, you need to go to college. Or it's no longer an achievement to go to college, you need to, I don't know what, of course you could say grad school, but um, do something else after that. Um, and then once it's expected, you begin to count on it. And then even here's an even different position. You're in a position where you can't live without it. Um, so yeah, that's such a different position for one generation to be like can't live without it, whereas a couple generations back it was a luxury. You could do without it, but hey, it did help your life. So I think about things, oh, I don't know, like our food supply chain. Uh, 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 it's like I and a bunch of people can't live without grocery stores. That's a very different situation than grocery stores being convenient, you know. Anyway, um, yeah. What have we got? So he's talking about, sure, every now and then there are holdouts, that just refuse to adopt, but in general, we can't stop progress. Who says either way, whether you choose to adopt a new lifestyle or don't choose to adopt a new lifestyle, the old way was doomed. Um, the story of the luxury trap carries with it an important lesson. Humanity's search for an easier life released immense forces of change that transformed the world in ways nobody envisioned or wanted. So my note here is like, this is sort of how I tend to feel um, sometimes when I think about artificial intelligence or even some space exploration. I'm not. I feel this like sadness, like oh my gosh, there's no stopping this from coming, and I wish there were, and that's how it makes me feel. Um, but I think when I look at that more deeply, what I'm really feeling is I'm feeling a nervousness and an anxiousness that we're going to repeat our mistakes in the next phase. That we won't have learned our lessons from the past, and now we're just going to go either pollute more of space or create, power hungry robots, or what I'm just coming up with examples. Um, and I think that's what makes me want to go, no, like, take it back, no progress. Yeah, stop, stop the wheels of progress. Um, and I think as I read further into this book and as I've just sort of watched other YouTube videos about him, um, I think his point is not to be sort of defeatist with the idea that you can't stop progress, but to be very eyes wide open and aware that yes, we're going to continue with progress, and we need to be very aware of how we're using it so we don't repeat our mistakes. Um, so, anyway, see, that's 21 minutes. I can talk about like 10 pages of this book. So, that's the good thing, and that's the problem. So, I will finally reset the timer. I do actually have to end the stream early today. It's just been a wacky week around here, but I will reset the timer and let you get to it if you haven't already muted me long ago. I just realized I set my timer for the wrong time. I set my timer for when I normally end the streams, and I was supposed to end it early. So let me stop this timer, and we'll have to end there. Thank you for being here. I hope you're happy with what you accomplished for your hour, and I hope to see you on Monday. Bye.